No concern about the $46 million plus spent on the behalf of AIPAC that should worry people about perhaps you doing their bidding should you win the seat?
Well, I don't think there's much difference between super PACs going in for Abdul or super PACs going in for me.
What you've just seen is a clip of the Senate debate between Haley Stevens and Abdul al-Sayed on Fox News Detroit, which was broadcast on July 27, 2026. And I wanted to take this time to discuss the funding differences between Haley Stevens and Abdul al-Sayed. Dr. Abdul al-Sayed's 2026 U.S. Senate primary campaign in Michigan is primarily funded by a high-volume grassroots individual donor base supplemented by progressive medical advocacy groups and a dedicated independent political action committee. He's run his campaign on a platform of refusing all corporate PAC money. His principal campaign committee, Abdul for U.S. Senate, has raised millions driven heavily by small digital individual donations through platforms like ActBlue. For instance, in July 26 alone, his campaign pulled in over $3.3 million from tens of thousands of unique digital donors, averaging roughly $49 per donation. Additionally, his high-profile individual contributors include children's educational content creator Rachel Griffin, better known as Miss Rachel. And while Dr. al-Sayed does reject corporate PAC donations, several outside progressive and political groups have spent money independently to support his candidacy. The Fighting for Michigan PAC, a pro-al-Sayed super PAC that has spent roughly $2 million to support him, with notable donors to his PAC including Medicare for All, Forward Blue PAC, fast food executive Zubair Khazi, as well as al-Sayed's father-in-law. Additionally, the 314 Action Fund, a national political organization that elects scientists and healthcare professionals to office, endorsed al-Sayed, as well as the American Priorities PAC, which is an anti-APAC political action committee that pledged independent spending, roughly $350,000. Now, his funding stands in stark contrast to his opponent, Representative Haley Stevens, whose campaign has been heavily reinforced by tens of millions of dollars in outside spending from corporate-backed groups and the APAC-affiliated United Democracy Project. In fact, Stevens' Senate primary campaign in Michigan is primarily backed by massive infusions of outside super PAC and dark money spending, making her campaign one of the most heavily financed in the country. Her campaign and 6 aligned outside groups have spent over $61 million just on advertisements leading up to the August 4 primary, with the largest share of Stevens' backing coming from the pro-Israel lobby, the American Israel Affairs Committee, better known as AIPAC, who, along with its affiliated groups, have directed more than $46 million in independent expenditures to boost Stevens and run negative ads against al-Sayed. And AIPAC has been using the United Democracy Project as the primary funding vehicle, spending tens of millions on ads and media reservations, and this $46 million does represent AIPAC's largest investment in a single political race. Additionally, Stevens is also heavily supported by major centrist and corporate-backed independent expenditure groups. A super PAC called A Stronger Michigan has poured roughly $13.9 million into television and radio ads supporting her. Federal campaign finance disclosures revealed that this group is almost entirely bankrolled by Center Forward, a dark money nonprofit that does not disclose its donors and historically relies on corporate and pharmaceutical industry funding. A separate super PAC by the same organization has spent an additional $2 million on ads tracking. And while Stevens has claimed that her current Senate campaign rejects active utility money, her previous U.S. House campaigns and leadership PACs accepted $45,000 from DTE Energy PAC and thousands more from Consumer Energy, the special interest energy group. In summary, the 26th Michigan Democratic Senate primary represents one of the starkest ideological and financial contrasts in modern campaign history. The race is transformed into a massive $70+ million proxy battle between grassroots progressive networks and corporate-backed pro-Israel outside spending. And for a more direct comparison, for their core funding strategy, Abdul al-Sayed utilizes small dollar grassroots individual donations, while Haley Stevens utilizes high-volume outside super PAC and dark money spending. For corporate PAC money, Abdul al-Sayed rejects all corporate PAC funds, whereas Haley Stevens accepts corporate PAC backing historically funded by utilities. The primary outside backer for Abdul al-Sayed is Medicare for All PAC and progressive PACs, whereas the primary outside backer for the Haley Stevens camp is the United Democracy Project and Center Forward, both Israel-aligned groups utilizing dark money. For estimated outside spending, Abdul al-Sayed had spent roughly $3 million compared to $61 million plus spent by the Haley Stevens camp. And while the average donation size for Abdul al-Sayed is a roughly $49 per digital donation through ActBlue, the average donation size for Haley Stevens has been driven by maxed out donors and multiple corporate PACs. So hitting more directly on that little point that Ms. Stevens made about her not thinking that there's much of a difference between the PACs, well, it turns out that outside groups have outspent al-Sayed's allies by a ratio of roughly 20-1. The United Democracy Project alone has poured $46 million into the race, like I said, making it the largest single race investment by AIPAC in their history. While al-Sayed has formally disavowed all super PAC involvement, and independent groups have spent roughly only $2 million supporting him. Additionally, al-Sayed's base relies on that high volume of individual donors, whereas Stevens' base is powered by Washington insiders, institutional donors, and centrist dark money groups like Center Forward, which route millions into the state without disclosing their original corporate donors. And finally, while al-Sayed's funding mirrors his background as a doctor and progressive, drawing cash from Medicare for All PAC and 314 Action, which is a scientist and politics PAC, Stevens' financial profile aligns with establishment politics, drawing scrutiny from progressives for her past campaign contributions from major major state utilities like DTE Energy. In summary, while Al Sayed maintains a highly motivated organic donor base, he faces an unprecedented media onslaught with that $61 million in outside spend. Stevens' massive cash advantage allows her campaign to completely dominate the television and radio airwaves in the final weeks leading up to the August 4th primary. But I just want everyone to note how blatantly and egregiously that she just lied to voters right on TV. Like, blatantly lied. Talking about like how she was trying to trick people into thinking that her funding and Abdul al-Sayed's funding is the same. Note how blatantly that she lied. You don't want that fucking lying piece of shit as a senator.